Welcome to the inner world of filmmaking. I'm your host, Tammy Magaro. I'm an editor, podcaster, and still photographer. In this show, I will interview filmmakers in all facets of production and distribution. In this episode, we explore the inner world of sex and violence through the lens of the intimacy coordinator, Elizabeth Lizzy Talbot. She is the founder and director of Intimacy for Stage and Screen, which was one of the first companies in the UK advocating for safe intimacy for the stage and screen. Lizzy is a certified intimacy director and coordinator professional in the USA. She is one of the lead instructors on intimacy coordination and works professionally as an intimacy coordinator across various networks, including Bridgerton, Dexter New Blood, The Nevers, The Witcher, among others. Welcome, Lizzy.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
This is very exciting and a very exciting topic. Let's start off with the beginning. What was your road into filmmaking and creating the role of the intimacy coordinator?
So I started off in the theatre world as a fight director, and I did a little bit of stunt coordination as well. And something that became very apparent quite quickly was that when we were doing scenes of intimacy and violence, in particular domestic violence, actors would have a really good frame of reference for working with violence. They'd often had training in it. They'd often done either stage combat or stunt training. They were familiar with it. There was a process. There's protocols. So actors would generally do very, very well in those types of scenes in terms of the violence. However, what we noticed was when it came to moments of intimacy, there were no protocols. There were no processes. And actors would having to draw on their own personal experience without really any guidance. Having thought about that, what I did is I started to sort of research what it was like working in intimate scenes. So, for example, I sent out a questionnaire to actors and asked them to report back on their experiences of working with intimate scenes, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And interestingly, they all came back as overwhelmingly negative. So I started to do a little more research in the area. And thinking about what protocols, what safeties could we put in place to sort of re-navigate these scenes. And that's really sort of where it stemmed from. Yeah, it was fascinating meeting lots of other people who were also investigating this at the same time and who were interested in this topic as well. And it became such a brilliant forum for this work, talking to people, in lots of different countries about their experience.
I think this has been needed for a long time. And it's kind of interesting that, with the Me Too movement and all that, and then having a position, intimacy coordinator, I was just thinking about Leaving Las Vegas. That scene where, sexual violence and how real that looked. And I was thinking, they didn't have anybody to navigate these scenes with the actors to make them feel safe. And I had read in an interview with Elizabeth that she felt like she was sexually, taken advantage of here, as if it had actually happened. And I was thinking, and in particular, I would be curious about females versus males. Do they both feel the same, or is it more happening with females needing to feel safe more so than male? Or does a male feel like I
think everyone comes at it with their own personal experience. So, for example, I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. I think historically, women have felt a little bit more unsafe doing these scenes. But I also think that is connected to the previous imbalance of women coming into the film industry. There was often a lot of men in high-power positions. And so I think that the imbalance there was a little bit more stark. I think the interesting thing about the Me Too movement is that there is a perception that spawned the intimacy coordination movement. And actually, the fascinating thing here is that it was going on long before the Me Too movement.
That's good news. Good news.
Yeah, it was. People were already on this. We were already looking into it. We were already researching it before the Me Too movement came along. What I will say is that it became a catalyst for change. I think people started waking up. People started answering our emails. People started putting money aside and budgeting for someone to come in and help facilitate these scenes. So that's really where the Me Too movement for us kind of changed everything.
Right. Made it more in the forefront to do this.
Yeah.
More so than maybe when you created it. You created it in 2015?
Yeah, so that's when I started researching it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things is that was something that we got told repeatedly was the industry's never going to change. Like this is how it's always been. This is how it's always going to be. Like it's just a tough industry. And it is a tough industry. That's still very true to this day. But I think what's happened is people have realized that it doesn't have to be the way that it was. There doesn't have to be these huge power imbalances on set. There doesn't have to be, negative power dynamics.
Yes.
Yeah, at play, in that everyone should have a voice. I think that you can still have a creative vision. The director can still lead the way, but I think it's important that it's participatory rather than sidelined, and that's something that's been really fascinating to watch as people have become more involved in these conversations.
Yeah, and it can make a very beautiful, loving scene when coordinated, correctly, and then where everybody feels safe.
Yeah, and I think that that's really what people have started to realize, is that actually what we're seeing now is the quality of these scenes improve. Because when you've only got personal experience to draw from,
right,
or potentially what you've seen happen before, I think it can be a little bit limiting. But when you've got the freedom to feel empowered in these scenes, you can really explore them to a completely different level. I mean, it's the same thing, and I liken it to a fight scene that I'm very familiar with. As soon as actors know the boundaries and as soon as they know the choreography, they're free to play and they can really commit to what they're doing. Whereas if you don't know where the boundaries are and if you're not sure of the choreography, everything will be hesitant. Every move will be filled with uncertainty. Is it okay to touch them there? Am I going too far? Is this all right? We're getting into our bodies and with a sense of trepidation rather than confidence.
Right.
And I think that that's really the difference when we're working with scenes of simulated sex and nudity. When you're attacking it with confidence, I think the results speak for themselves.
Yes. So why don't we define what is an intimacy coordinator on set and what do you do?
Yeah. So I think one of the first things that comes to mind with intimacy coordination is definitely the advocate part, right? We're seen as advocates on set for the cast and crew, and that's often a piece that's missed. So, for example, we're advocating for actors, we're establishing their boundaries, we're ensuring that closed set protocols are put in place. We're there to, facilitate any of their needs. We're there to work with their nudity riders to ensure that legally they're protected. So there's lots of stuff that comes into the advocation part of this. And like I said, I think that's one of the first things that people think of when they come to intimacy coordination. The second part is we're really liaising with many different departments. So this is where it comes down to the practicalities of the scene. We're talking to hair and makeup about what we're going to need. Are we going to need a merkin? Is there a wig that they're wearing that's going to be affected by the simulated sex? Have they got tattoos that maybe need to be covered up? And then we're also working with the stunt department. Are we simulating sex up against a bookcase? Is this a scene of violence? All sorts of things that come into that. And then we often have many conversations with wardrobe because we're really looking into what specific types of modesty garments do we need for these actors in these scenes. How can we protect them? How can we provide them barriers so that there's no genital contact between actors and simulated sex scenes? So that's where it gets into sort of like a much more of a administrative side of the role right there.
Right.
And then the third most important part is the choreography, right? So we are facilitating choreography between two people for simulated sex scenes. And that's really like the heart of the job because, you can advocate for an actor all day long, but what they really need is a change, in the choreography that can solve so many issues. But you've got to be able to have the ability to choreograph well to be able to do that. So I'd say that choreography is the most important part of the role.
Yeah, I was thinking that probably one needs to bring an intimacy coordinator on a date too, because it would solve a lot of problems.
Well, the interesting thing about that is that I've certainly often been asked about reality TV shows.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'll often say to people, like, that's not what we do. In fact, it's actually the opposite. What we try and do is create a very clear line between personal and professional, because for so long with these scenes, they were blurred, right? We must be one of the very few professions in the world where extreme body contact with another person is not only expected, it's often required.
Yeah.
So how do we facilitate that? And I think that that's where people can get really confused with their feelings, because when you're kissing someone, you are releasing hormones into your body, whether you want to or not. It's a physiological reaction that you can't control. Same with erections, right?
Right.
People can't control them. We're releasing hormones and we're having physiological reactions. And so I think it's really important to bookend these scenes and to separate them so that actors can go home to their partners,
right,
and not take the residue of these scenes home with them. And I don't think that was really ever managed before. People were never looking at these scenes with an eye of closure. Like, how can we keep what happens on set stays on set, and you get to go home, you get to live your life, and you get to take off your actor hat and put on your personal hat for the evening. And I think that's a really important thing. It's very easy to get into the mindset of like living, breathing, sleeping, acting. But actually, it's a job at the end of the day.
Right.
And everyone deserves body autonomy, and everyone deserves to be able to clock out at some point. And so, yeah, it's a tool in doing that.
Yeah. Well, how do you work with somebody? I mean, how do you do that? How do you separate that?
Mm-hmm. So again, it's everything from just reinforcing what the actors are doing and what the characters are doing. So the actors are simulating sex, the characters are having sex. And just that subtle change in language can provide that separation, right? Because otherwise actors are hearing all day that they're having sex with someone. That's a bit strange, really. It's a bit weird, and it's hard to not hard to differentiate. They know they're not. But at the same time, I think mentally it's really good to have that distinction. Me as a person, I'm simulating sex with someone else, whereas my character is having sex. We've got that distinction. Making sure that, when people are in the zone, that's fine, but we're spending time at the end of the scene just taking a little bit of time to sort of decompress. Because, we spend a lot of time, and actors will spend a lot of time embodying these characters, right? They'll spend a lot of time, a lot of research, getting into role. But it's really important that we do the same amount of work on the other side in de-rolling. Really important that we get to have a little bit of a release at the end of that. And so we'll do various exercises and just take some time to have a bit of a decompression session at the end of the scene.
Who typically hires you on set? Is it the producer?
Yes, so typically a producer will reach out and see what our availability is, and then they'll hire us from there. But we often get contacted by production coordinators as well.
Okay. And then when do they need to bring on an intimacy coordinator?
So typically we ask that they bring us on as early as possible. It gives us all the appropriate time to prepare. My worst nightmare is being called a couple of days beforehand, just because it's a lot harder. We have a 48-hour turnaround on nudity riders. Getting called within that time frame means that we won't be able to do the scene. So we ask to be taken on as early as possible in pre-production.
Yeah, and what happens when something goes awry? So, I'm sure that this has probably happened where you coordinate something and then people go rogue. I mean, does that ever happen? And then what do you do?
Typically people don't go rogue. We spend so much time in pre-production planning and ensuring that the day will go smoothly. But yeah, obviously, things come up. Something that often happens is that, potentially actors may decide that on the day they're feeling less comfortable than they thought they might. Potentially, it sometimes happens. Or they feel that a different position feels a bit better now that they're in the scene and it's, But to be honest, we spend a lot of time in rehearsal. So often those things are really ironed out early on. So it's not very often that we're on set and something happens.
And nothing where a director will say, I want you to take your shirt off. and that wasn't planned before. Does that ever happen?
Occasionally it'll happen, but I mean, we're pretty clear with production beforehand about what the expectations are. We often talk about, what's involved in a nudity rider, what the parameters are, what the expectations are. And so they're typically fairly aware that they cannot ask for more than what the nudity rider determines on the day.
Mm-hmm. And what about who comes up with the garments? Is it the wardrobe?
Yeah, so the way that I work is that these are garments that are worn on an actor's body, and so they come under wardrobe's purview. So what I will do is I will assess the scene, figure out what we need, figure out what the best sort of modesty garments would be for the scene, and then chat to wardrobe about it, and I can point them in the right direction to either make or buy them.
Okay, great. And then walk me through coordinating a passionate love scene. I mean, how do you work with the actors?
So typically what happens is we'll meet, I'll meet with the director first and, just kind of talk to them about their vision for the scene. And then we'll meet with the actors. And the director gets to chat to them and tell them exactly, what they're thinking of. And then I'll follow up with the actors and sort of just really get their remits, what they're comfortable with. And then we'll really go from there. So I have quite a few in-depth actor chats before we even get to rehearsal. And then what we'll do is we'll figure out parameters and we'll get to rehearsal, and then we'll sort of like get in the space and sort of rehearse. I'll work with a director to create choreography that tells the story but still works within the actor's boundaries. And then we'll determine from there, what we need in terms of modesty wear and, any other practical considerations. And then we'll sort out the nudity riders. And then when that time has expired in terms of like the 48 hours after that, then we'll shoot.
Wow. That's so cool. So then you're watching the whole time while the action is being taken?
Yeah, because, if an actor has said, they're comfortable with nudity above the waist, but not including nipple, then, it's my job to be on the monitor and make sure that that's something that we're not seeing.
Oh, that's good. I was also thinking that, do you talk to, I'm assuming you probably talk to each of the actors individually?
Yeah.
And then together?
Yeah, because, it's really important for them to have, someone that they can speak to, someone that they can confide in about, anything that's going on for them, any parameters that they have, any boundaries that they have, if they want to avoid or include any specific choreography. And again, sometimes these actors have met each other for the very first time, and then, they'll be shooting a very passionate scene, in 2 weeks' time. And so they might not know each other. And I think it's really important that, they have time separate from each other to chat to me about, anything that comes up.
Now, what about something that's more sexual violence? You were the intimacy coordinator on the Boston Strangler and Dexter New Blood. How do you work in that environment with probably more so a female on feeling safe in a not so safe place?
So, whenever you're doing a scene of sexual violence, it's really important to work in tandem with a stunt coordinator, right? Because, we're working together as a team at that point. They have a specific eye for the violence, and I've got a specific eye for the intimacy. And so when we're collaborating, we're both having an outlook on safety for each section. And I think that's the best way to do these scenes. And obviously, it's really important that I'll have chats with the actors beforehand about, how they're feeling about it, if there's anything I should know beforehand, if there's anything they'd like me to take into consideration when doing these scenes. And typically, we'll just have a little bit more communication than perhaps, for a scene of consensual intimacy.
Yeah, it must be challenging because with a scene like that, that's probably shot several times in different setups. So you have to go through that over and over. Do they take breaks in between? Is there scheduled breaks to just say come back and then go in, or should they just go through it?
It's really whatever is working for the actors. Typically I think it's helpful to have, a couple of breaks in there just to have some space, have some time out, and then, obviously they go back to it. Or if they just want to get into that mindset once and then complete it, that's also something. So it it's really not a one size fits all. I'll try and tailor my work to the actors I have in front of me and meet them where they are, rather than trying to fit them into a box or a process that, I deem fit.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, then the position is very adapting.
Yes.
You're adapting and adjusting to each person.
It has to be, because everyone's bringing their own experience of intimate scenes, whether they're positive or negative. It's fascinating. You work with some actors who've had years of doing these scenes and they've found them really hard and really horrible. They come at it anticipating having a lot of anxiety around it. And then obviously, you meet some actors, especially, actors who are very new to the work, and this is maybe their first show, and they come at it. Again, it's a different outlook on this, because working with an intimacy coordinator is all they've ever known, and they've always felt pretty safe doing these scenes. So yeah, it's just important to meet everyone where they are individually, because it's personal work.
Right. So then with that, do you take a different approach working with actors that identify as male or female or non-binary? Is there a difference, or is it just like you said, you just adapt to the person? It doesn't matter what sex they are.
Yeah, I think it's just got to be so individual, and I think that's really the key here. Anytime that you attempt like a one size fits all, I think is where you're really going to get stuck with this work. The actors are individuals, the scenes are specific. You will never do the same scene twice, ever. This work is constantly changing. It's ever evolving. Even the way that we were talking about consent, 3 years ago is different to the way that we're talking about consent now. The percentage of like relationships that we were seeing on screen 3 years ago is different to what we're seeing now. It's a really interesting field, because it is ever changing at this point. And and I think that one of the benefits of this job is that you're also constantly evolving and you're constantly updating how you work. And that's a really exciting place to be.
Yeah. Is that what you love about your job?
Like I said, I love variety, and this is something that really gives me that, because like I said, I'm so rarely ever doing the same thing twice. I'm working with different productions, different actors, different scenes all the time. And so there's always something new. And I think that's what keeps it really fresh. And just is such an interesting side of the job.
Yeah. And you get to travel. I mean, you're from England, so you work in England, New York, and LA, and all over, just wherever they send you.
I pretty much, go where the work is. I have to work between the UK and the US predominantly. That seems to be where most of my work has come from. But I've worked, all over Europe as well in this, and further afield too. So yeah, it does vary a lot.
Yeah. And then you're also an instructor. I mean, how do you find the time to do all of this?
Yeah, it can get very, very busy. Yeah, it's a growing field. We've got a lot of people who are interested in doing the work, and there's, obviously a demand for it at the moment, but it's not something that this is not a fake it till you make it kind of job. This really involves a lot of training, a lot of research, a lot of work. It's not something that I feel that people can just sort of dip into. It is, it's a separate discipline, and I think it's really important to respect it, have the experience and have the willingness to learn on this job. There's been quite a few times this year where I've been called in to work on productions where they've taken on someone who maybe doesn't quite have the experience and things have gone wrong. And then coming in to work on those jobs is very, very difficult, because, if actors have had a negative experience with an intimacy coordinator, that can leave a really bad taste. So those jobs are hard, sort of being able to turn that around. So yeah, I think really digging into someone's CV and resume for this work is just so important for productions.
How long does the training usually take?
I mean, it varies, for whichever certification program you're going through. If you're going to do a certification program, typically they're about 1 to 2 years. But with the caveat of that is that you're for my company, what I like people to do is come in with a really high level of choreography training and teaching before we start. Because, so many times you are teaching actors choreography. And so therefore, if you're attempting to do this work without the choreography, it's a really tricky and tough thing to do, because it's not only about how you move your body, it's about how do you explain to an actor how to move their body.
And
so, yeah, it's a lot.
Now, did you come up with the curriculum?
Yeah, so I put a curriculum together for my training program, and it's been revamped quite a few times because, like I said, it's ever evolving. There's modules on there for this year's training that didn't exist 1 to 2 years ago. We're now doing modules that involve working with VFX and green screen and like water work, because it's so much of our job. So there's lots of different things that we're consistently updating in the work.
Oh, that's awesome. So any advice to filmmakers out there that have scenes that require an intimacy coordinator, what to think about or know?
Yeah,
going into it?
I think it's really important that, if you are doing a scene of intimacy and you don't have a budget for an intimacy coordinator, then just asking yourself, is there another way I can tell the story? In the same way that if you don't have a budget for a mass battle, you'd probably find another way of telling the story. It's the same thing for this. And then the second piece of advice I'd say is really vet your intimacy coordinator. Find out what they've done, and not only like how many days on set they've done, like what training have they done too? Because I think so that's really where the heart of this comes into, and because, lots of people can pick up credits, but they might only have a credit for like a kissing scene. And if you're asking them to come in and do, like an orgy of 20 people, well, is the 2 or 3 credits that they have with kissing scenes going to be enough to be able to handle like the orgy of 20 people? So I think that's really important as well, like doing the research into who you're hiring, and what they're bringing to the table.
Oh, I think those are excellent points. Is there anything that you would like to share about what you're doing, or anything you want to leave the audience with?
One of the things for me is that it's just really exciting seeing the industry change, grow, and adapt. And I think I'm just really excited to see where it's going to be in 5 years' time, because it looks so different to where it was 5 years ago. We're not there yet. It's not perfect. There's so many things that need to change. But we have more momentum than I think we've ever had at this point. And so, I'm really hopeful and excited for where the future lies with this work.
Well, yeah, and I think that I think back at some, like in the 70s when you watch movies to now, it's like the things they do and show. It's almost like, my God, are they having sex or like it looks so real to having sex.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and one other thing is, like you were saying, is, luckily for women, when they get aroused, nobody's, you're not really going to feel it like when a male gets aroused and stuff. Is that something, like, how do you deal with that? Do you just talk it through that these are possibilities that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really important to put on the table, that, we're doing a scene of simulated sex and physiological reactions that often can occur. The good thing about this, though, is that modesty wear has come such a long way, that most modesty wear is padded or will put a barrier between people so that if there is an erection that happens, nobody will know. And I think that's the really important thing, because you can then just keep in the mindset of the character rather than worry about what your body as an actor is doing.
Right, and mess up the scene because you're going to be self-conscious.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this is great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to get out there and make a film. Reach out to your local filmmakers group to get involved and connect. Please subscribe to the show if you like it, and follow me on Instagram @TammyMcGarrow. Until we meet again, what's your story?